Day 11 of the Diddy trial, and the prosecution continues to put on witnesses to establish their case against Diddy. Today's trial, Derek, honed in on the criminal enterprise with witnesses who either worked for him or witnessed some of the actions that the prosecution alleges were tantamount to creating a criminal enterprise. Obviously, the centerpiece of this RICO case. Tell us some of what Cassie's mom talked about, as well as one of Diddy's assistants who took the stand for quite some time.
Yeah, so this is one of the more complicated parts of this case. If the Cassie testimony was really built around, was she coerced? It was really a single issue. Was she able to establish that she was coerced into these freak-offs? The RICO case, meaning the racketeering charge, is really one that needs to be built brick by brick. What they're trying to establish is that Diddy, through bad boy companies and through his own sort of other dealings, ran a very complicated criminal enterprise. And through doing that, he had people around him who did his bidding illegally. And how he did that, how he made people sort of work for his criminal enterprise that they're trying to establish, was through various means. So let's go into...
Can I just jump in with one quick thought? There is so much. We've seen so many people in the comments say, this is not a RICO case, not a criminal enterprise. It's not about the mafia. We understand perfectly well that RICO laws were there to stop organized crime as we typically think about it. Hundreds of people murdering, delivering drugs, prostitution, the whole thing that we see in The Sopranos, classic RICO. That does not mean at all that other people who are not in the Italian mafia cannot also be guilty of RICO crimes. And by the way, 99.5% of RICO cases have nothing to do with organized crime the way that we think about it.
That's right.
Instead, it is individuals getting together and conspiring to commit illegal acts of all kinds. It doesn't have to be murder and mayhem. It can simply be, I don't know, freak-offs.
That's right.
That's an illegal act, allegedly, that they hired prostitutes to do it. And if there's a criminal enterprise that's set up for the purpose of providing drugs and guns and girls and everything else, it doesn't matter that it's not the traditional television-style RICO. RICO comes in many shapes and sizes, and I want to reiterate that almost every RICO case prosecuted nationwide has nothing to do with the kind of gangland-style stuff you would see in the old Soprano-style television.
Jason's right.
So,
That's just
anyway,
not the way those
out of there.
statutes are written. Now, people can question. I think what people questioning that gets to is, should the government be using its resources to prosecute someone who isn't running a mafia-like organization? That's a fair question. That's a fair question. But whether it fits under the statute, it certainly does.
It's an irrelevant question of whether it was meant to target this kind of activity. It does, by its law, target it. And if the prosecutors can meet the various elements of the crime of RICO, or racketeering, then they get a conviction.
That's right. And that is what they are setting up through this guy, David James, who was an assistant to Diddy. And what he is testifying on the stand about is the ways in which he was put into this criminal enterprise. He says when he interviewed for the job, he was told in no uncertain terms, we aim to serve the king. And Diddy was referred to as the king. So he knew going into this that serving his every pleasure and what he wanted done was something that that you had to sign up for when you took the job. However, he says there were incidents along the way. One in which there was a party where a videographer was hired to film the party. This guy said one of the perks of the job was, we got to do fun things. And there was a videographer who showed him a video of this guy, what he called Diddy bopping. And he said, look, I was drinking Ciroc, I was taking ecstasy, and I was sort of grooving. I was vibing at the party. He says Diddy then sat next to him going through this video and said, hey, player, is that you on the video sort of vibing out there on drugs? And he interpreted that to be, and then Diddy said, I'm going to keep that just in case I need it. To David James, he said he interpreted that as basically compromise, like sort of something he can
don't
hold
step out
over.
of line. I'm going to hold this over you. Right.
That's right. I'll hold this over to
right.
you. And that could be don't snitch about the things you see. That could be listen to everything I say or I'll release this. But the way that was interpreted was a threat to go along with the program or else. And so these are the types of things you're hearing in the testimony. Now, David James, to be fair, said he did not witness any physical violence with Cassie, but that's not his purpose on the stand. His purpose is to show the other parts of this alleged criminal enterprise. He also discusses an incident where he said he was doing his job. There was a report back to Diddy from one of his lieutenants that Suge Knight was at Mel's Diner. Mel's Diner is a very famous restaurant here in Los
Hollywood
Angeles.
Diner. Lots of famous celebs used to go there and hang out. It's been featured in tons of movies, the whole thing.
That's right. Apparently, the lieutenant said Suge Knight has been spotted at this restaurant. Diddy then said, let's go roll up on Suge Knight. They gathered some guns. According to David James, Diddy had 3 guns on his lap. They went to Mel's Diner in search of Suge Knight to either, I don't know, threaten, intimidate, potentially kill. No one knows. Suge Knight was not there, but David James recounts this as the moment he knew his safety was at risk and he wanted out of the job. But he's testifying as to how difficult it was to get out of this orbit, because that's the case the prosecutors want to make, that this was a criminal enterprise that the people working within kind of felt trapped as well.
And I have to tell you, because we talked about a minute ago, you don't have to establish it was like an old classic mafia, but when somebody's not allowed to leave a criminal organization like this, and there's no denying that it was an organization that engaged in criminal acts, but one of the hallmarks of old traditional mafia organizations is once you're in, you can never get out.
That's right.
And so the prosecutors are trying to sort of lean into that, saying, you jury don't really think it's a traditional criminal enterprise? Well, this guy David James is telling you that he was threatened that he could never leave, that if he ever did anything wrong vis-a-vis Diddy, that he could be punished by exposure of these videos. And David James said he felt threatened by this, not just as, I think, not just the exposure and the embarrassment, but also his physical safety as well.
Yeah.
And that looks more and more like a traditional sort of mafia-style criminal enterprise.
And who knows how this is landing, but what I find compelling about the testimony we've seen to date is that the witnesses are not they're not angels. You know, this is a guy who took a job with Diddy. He took some ecstasy. They're not people who, the credibility comes from the fact that they're also behaving maybe inappropriately to some people. Cassie certainly has to deal with that. She was aggressive at times. She was making threats at times. It's how all of this looks to the jury. It was, you know, was Diddy sort of forcing these people into situations where they were doing misdeeds so that he could keep control of them? And I think that's landing.
Right. And even David James testified that he had received some form of immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony. The jury interprets that how they will. He testified, just to wrap it up, he testified that he witnessed Diddy using drugs. He had a role in stocking hotel rooms for Diddy, both with sort of the instruments of the sex acts that they were going to commit, condoms and lube and things like that, but also drugs, this Louis Vuitton bag that had the Percocets in them, the ecstasy in them, and that he was subject to a lie detector test and to various intimidating searches. At one point, he talked about that he was on a computer and Diddy busts in and wants to see the computer's history for fear that David James was maybe a turncoat and Diddy wanted to catch him doing that. Apparently, according to David James, there was nothing to find because he had never done anything. But nevertheless, more to the intimidating your employees part of, again, this criminal enterprise.
Really does sound like a culture of fear. So
move on if you can, unless you have more on David James. I want to talk about Cassie's mom. This is somebody who was not subject to cross-examination. I'm leading with the tail leading the head here, but not subject to cross-examination by the defense, which is telling. It's very hard to go after somebody's mom when they get up on the stand. She's still a young woman. This is not, by no means an old woman, but nevertheless, very...
they let her get on and off the stand quickly.
Yeah, this is a woman who talked about the horrific things that her daughter went through, and without cross-examination, what did she testify?
That's right. So she's really reporting on things that Cassie told her during the course of her relationship with Diddy. And one of the things she said was, Cassie, my daughter, came to me and said that Diddy was threatening to release sex tapes of me, that he was very upset. This was around 2011 when Diddy got very upset over Cassie's relationship with Kid Cudi. More on that, by the way, in the coming days. Kid Cudi is going to testify, so we'll get some closure on his thoughts on the car explosion and all that stuff. But what she said was her daughter told her that she was in fear. And then Diddy told the mother, according to this testimony, that he was so upset about this relationship with Cudi that he wanted her parents, Cassie's parents, to reimburse him for the money he had invested in Cassie.
$30,000 was it?
$20,000.
Okay.
He said, these people who are not wealthy people, you need to wire me $20,000 because I invested $20K in your daughter for her music career and so forth, and now she's with Kid Cudi, so I've lost my investment. Basically strong-armed them. They said they were very nervous. She testified that they got another mortgage on their home, got the money together, wired it to Diddy, and subsequently, the money was wired back to their account. Now, I want to delve into
Yes.
what that means.
Yes.
Because to me, that means that Diddy was made aware either by his own realization or someone told him, hey, man, you're extorting her parents now pretty openly. This is a third party that we don't have much control over. And by sending the money back to them, I think showed an awareness that he had crossed the line.
I'm glad you brought this up. First of all, the act of demanding $20,000 for these people, and they felt physically threatened by this, fear for this, both for themselves and for the daughter, may in fact be a criminal act in and of itself. They, who do not have any money, they had to take a second mortgage on their home, and to get just $20,000, to get $20,000 out, they send it to him.
They send it to a man worth 9 figures of wealth.
Yes. So
it's horrific.
He demands $20,000. Right. He's worth $500 million.
It's a rounding error for someone like Diddy.
And he demands $20,000, strong arms them out of fear for their safety or for the daughter's safety to send him $20,000, which they do. They send him the 20 grand. It sits for a few days. One of two things happen. What you're saying is interesting, and I hadn't thought about this, that he may have been advised that this is a crime
You've
and
gone
returned
too far.
it.
Maybe.
The other option, which I don't know works out for him any better legally, is that he patched things up with Cassie in the meantime, and maybe she went back or maybe begged and asked, and he relented. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
But I would love to know why he returned that $20,000.
It's critical. And you're right. Cassie and he were on and off, and it might be that she said, look, you took my parents' last 20 grand. They had to get a second mortgage. Can they have that back? I'll do anything you want. That's entirely possible as well. In either
or
event,
he allegedly
sort of
firebombs Kid Cudi's car, and then the lawyers are like, Jesus, send the $20,000 back. This looks really bad.
It's an unbelievable picture that they're painting, and it seems to me that the prosecution is doing a rather effective job. Now, Harvey has a very different opinion of this. He believes that the racketeering charge is trumped up, and the fact that it feels trumped up will backfire on the prosecution. I just disagree. I think they are painting a horrific picture that is going to land with this.
Derek, we've got the $20,000. We've got the sex acts that we've talked about. We have the fact that he's alleged, and Kid Cudi is scheduled to take the stand later this week. So we're going to find out more about this whole allegations of firebombing his car. Lastly, we had another witness on the stand, an FBI agent who conducted the raid of Diddy's house, and they found loaded AK-15s, I believe, in Diddy's house, loaded.
With the serial numbers scratched off.
Thank you for pointing that out. I almost forgot. With the serial numbers scratched off. Does this look more and more like the traditional criminal mafioso enterprises that we're typically know about?
Yeah, you're sort of getting closer to that. I mean, he had a cache of weapons that they discovered, putting aside all the freaky baby oil, which I think makes headlines, but is ultimately not that interesting legally. The AK-47s or AK-15s, AR-15s are pretty fascinating. And scratching off serial numbers, you're starting to look like a criminal enterprise. I don't know what more you can make of it.
All right, last witness of the day is the Punisher. We both agree that this is the one that with the most tenuous link to actual crimes, but the most salacious testimony maybe we've heard in the trial so far.
It was extremely lurid. This is an exotic dancer who was hired by Diddy and Cassie to come to the Trump International Hotel, I believe.
In New York,
right?
yeah.
In New York. He described this encounter as going to the hotel room. Cassie is in a robe with nothing else on. Diddy, he described as being in some sort of
at first, in this anonymous man in some sort of he describes it as Muslim garb.
Where you only see their eyes.
Describing a hijab or a burqa, depending on the length of the garment. And he just, he doesn't know who it is at first until he sees the television set.
Yeah, apparently he saw a television that said, on those hotel televisions says, "Welcome, Mr. Combs, to the Trump Intercontinental."
And then
it clicked in his head.
And then he remembers seeing a picture of Cassie. He's like, oh my God, that's Cassie.
Yes.
Two and two come together.
And the guy's a big fan. And he does his dances for them. He says Diddy is directing it. What he's describing is somewhat of a freak off. It turns into a sort of...
He has sex with Cassie while Diddy watches.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that is a description of things we've seen in freak offs. What it didn't do is show much coercion to me. This didn't look like a sort of dangerous scenario, not the way he describes it. He says Diddy was giving sort of soft direction, but it didn't look violent in any way.
Yeah. Some technical difficulties, but we are back. Sorry about that. Let's just get into comments. Let's start with Monkey Man writes, but this is all for domestic violence, which he's not being charged with. What about all the trafficking claims? Where's the evidence? Trafficking is pretty easy here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the trafficking claim is going to be the easiest one. He hired some prostitutes from across state lines and brought them over state lines. I think that's going to be a win.
Let's stop. As frustrating as that might be to somebody, because I think it's not really that much of a crime, that meets the letter of the law. You may not have sex with a prostitute, period. And if you bring them across state lines for the purpose of having sex with a prostitute and paying them for them, which the Punisher meets all those qualifications, and that's just one person, you have met the definition of human trafficking. There's no reason to say that's unfair. Whatever. The law is what it is, and that is human trafficking.
That's right. The prosecutors are after much bigger game. They want the racketeering and they want the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That's where the action with Cassie is. The RICO stuff is with these witnesses today. We'll see if they get anywhere.
So that leads right into Bezo Lego, who says how many years is he actually facing? If it's just for the human trafficking, just for the prostitution charges, probably time served and he's out.
Yeah.
Prosecutors have to get him on the bigger stuff, especially the RICO, when you're talking, I mean, theoretically life in prison.
That's where you get the 15 years to life. If they get convictions on all of the big stuff, that's where you're hearing in media 15 years to life, and he could face that kind of time.
Yeah.
Susan says, sure, we think he's guilty, but we aren't the jury. If they want to deliberate today, I think he would walk. That's an interesting take. I have the opposite feeling. I think they have painted him as such a monster that all these little nuances about whether they've actually connected all the loops perfectly, connected the threats to specific sexual acts and things like that, I think a lot of that washes over the jury, and they think this is a guy who shouldn't be on the street.
I have to tell you, it's easy in this day and age to be sort of a contrarian, to just think, well, he's not, I think it's harder as members of the jury when you start breaking down the individual pieces of evidence. It's very hard when you're doing a civic duty like that. It's much harder to be the contrarian. You actually do follow the evidence, and the evidence to me at this point seems pretty overwhelming. The prosecutors still have some work to do, but I don't think they're going to have that much trouble doing it. Now, that said, we haven't heard the defense put on their case in chief yet. We don't know what the witnesses are going to say. If they have evidence that really undermines Cassie's entire testimony, I will change my views. But where I stand right now, I think it'd be a guilty.
The other thing I'd say is we are reviewing this through the sterile lens of news stories. We hear what happened in court. When you're sitting in there and you're listening to the tearful testimony of a pregnant woman for 4 days straight, that's different than us reading about it and thinking about all the legal nuances. I think it really hits people very, very hard on that jury. It remains to be seen if they'll ultimately get a conviction. But remember, this is not a televised trial like OJ. This is something that we're learning what happens after the court day, and that's very different than sitting in there.
Emily says, do both sides need to say who they're going to call to the stand at the start of trial? Can they add as the trial goes on? They will produce a witness list at the start of trial, and then day to day they will alert the judge who they intend to call tomorrow, so both sides are prepared for what they're going to have.
In general, trials don't like surprises.
Yeah.
That is a very television thing to say, I've got a surprise witness. You can have it under certain circumstances when something new comes up and it's important and pertinent. A judge may allow it, but the idea of a trial is to give everybody time to prepare for their cross-examination, for their direct testimony, and to allow it to play out in front of a jury. You're not looking for Perry Mason moments.
You will have opportunities sometimes to call rebuttal witnesses if there's a piece of testimony that the parties did not or one party did not expect as part of the case. You will then have an opportunity to call a witness to rebut that testimony. It doesn't happen that often. Oftentimes judges will say, no, you anticipated that testimony. You should have had that witness lined up and put them on direct. But nevertheless, you will see that from time to time.
That'll do it for us today. We will see you guys tomorrow.